Welcome back to the Red Race Podcast. I'm your host, Chris. Off to my right, my co-host, Stu. It's been a few weeks since we've joined together on this podcast to talk about sports car racing. We intentionally missed an episode last week because we wanted to wait and talk about the 2025 WEC entry list. And that is all. That is all there is to that. Stu, how are you doing tonight?
Doing well. It has been a few weeks, I guess, but it's been a busy few weeks in terms of news stories to talk about, hasn't it?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, we had some on-track action, despite the fact that we're 2 feet in the off-season now. We had the IMSA closed test at Daytona a couple of weeks back. By the way, you think they caught our bluff on the missing last week's? Hope we bought it.
Maybe.
Yeah, so we did have that IMSA test a couple of weeks ago at this point. We will be giving a quick little thoughts on that in this episode. Nothing too crazy. I mean, it's a test session, especially a November test session before a couple months of no on-track action and then Daytona officially in January. We don't want to read too far into the results for all of that, but we will go over some of the interesting news stories that came out of that. And then also, WEC entry list was unveiled for next season. We got plenty of thoughts to give on that as well. If you have any questions you would like us to answer throughout this episode, it's a live show, chat box. If it's down below or off to the right, just let us know what you would like us to ponder, and we'll try to get to as many of those at some point throughout this episode as we can. Already mentioned here the Daytona test for IMSA. Stu, this is sort of your forte a little bit. I want to get some of your thoughts initially before I go into some of my, I guess, things that I pulled out of this couple day long test session.
Yeah, it's the Daytona test is always it's always something to look forward to in the off season, even though this is a little bit earlier, I think, than it has been previously. I think
it's usually in December.
Yeah, usually early December. So, we didn't quite have that full take a breath after the season was over, but before this test took place. But lots of interesting storylines going into the test. It was announced in the lead up that the Valkyrie was going to be present at the test. It's a non-mandatory test, or it was a non-mandatory test this year. So, with at the time there were question marks. What's the Valkyrie going to be doing IMSA wise? Is it going to be ready for next season? And we'll talk about that, of course, in a moment. But so yeah, really good to see some of the Valkyrie on track with cars that it's going to be competing against for the first time, as far as I think I'm aware that this happened. So getting to see the Valkyrie out on track under some actual BOP environment as well. There was a BOP that was established for this test. So, things that just add that to the list of things that you love to see. Some interesting team and car combos as well, with the Iron Dames, confirming their switch from Lamborghini to Porsche. We got to see that car in its Porsche. And it's as a Porsche, we got to see that car on track in the test. Some new teams as well. If I'm not mistaken, I think Vanderstor Racing was present at the test. DXDT was there at the test with certainly a big name in Pipo Durrani behind the wheel of that Corvette. So I don't know. It was. I feel like coming into it, it was a little bit disappointing just knowing that it wasn't mandatory for all the manufacturers to go to. It wasn't the mandatory test that it's been in the past, but I think I was pleasantly surprised by the turnout that was there. I think there was 31 cars, if I'm not mistaken, that were on track. So, good to see, just some testing take place, a healthy test, and get to see some cars that, some new cars that we're going to see for next season, as well as some teams and drivers in some different machinery as well.
Yeah, pretty interesting as well that it's this soon after the actual close of the season. I mean, we're only
Yeah.
looking back about 5 weeks or so to Petit Le Mans. That's from right this point. From the test, it was 3 to 4 weeks after. I think it was almost exactly 4 weeks after Petit Le Mans.
Yeah.
You have that Wayne Taylor Racing switch over from Acura machinery over to the Cadillac in that 1 month span. Of course, you had the debut not the stateside debut of the Valkyrie, because they actually did their own testing at Road Atlanta after Petit Le Mans this year. But just some of those changes over. You mentioned Iron Dame switching over from Lamborghini to Porsche, where they have some prior experience in the European Le Mans series with that car already.
Yep.
Those are some of the main takeaways I brought in there. You did mention we did have Pipo Derani in the DXDT Racing Corvette in GTD. Don't know how far I want to read into that. He said he was there sort of enjoying it, just having some fun. But I'll tell you what, we are 2 feet in the off season at this point, and we
Yep.
don't have official confirmation of what his 2025 plans are. And certainly if that was a program that he was eyeing or potentially going to be competing for next year, it would be a big thing or it'd be a big signing for that team. But I'm just more surprised at this point, now that we're officially in the off season for both series, that we haven't heard any substantial news yet as to where he might be ending up next year.
Yeah, that's really the longer that it carries on for without an answer is, you know, the bigger of the larger of a story it becomes. And I mean, who knows? Potentially this could be a huge story that's brewing behind it. Seeing some of the other dominoes that have yet to fall as well, but it's the seats are getting limited for sure in established current teams in top class programs. But we'll see. He's one of the best drivers in top class machinery in the world, and he's proven that for the past 6, 7, 8 years. So I'm sure people's going to find himself in a good spot.
Yeah, and I don't want to read too far into
Yeah.
lap times in this session at all. But just briefly to go over the fastest cars that we saw in each class after the 7 on-track sessions that they had there. I just talked about this right before the podcast. I was surprised at how many on-track sessions there actually were. But it was the 63 Iron Lynx Lamborghini driven by Romain Grosjean who was fastest after that test. I believe they were actually fastest in the Daytona test last year as well in GTP. Yet have not competed on track at Daytona yet. So
yeah, haven't turned a legitimate lap in competition at the track.
Yeah, in what will almost certainly be the last actual outing with Lamborghini Iron Lynx as an entrant. Expecting to see a little bit of a change up there on the IMSA side next year, with Iron Lynx having that rather vocal departure from Lamborghini over on the World Endurance Championship side. Might see that program look a little bit different for 2025 over in IMSA, where we do expect them to stay.
Yep.
It was actually the 2 new Meyer Shank Racing Acuras following up in 2nd and 3rd place. I'm not going to read into it too much, but I have said from the start I expect that to be a very strong program next year, and we've seen what they've been able to do at Daytona in the past. So let's see if they can carry that sort of momentum into the official sessions. Over in LMP2, it was CrowdStrike Racing by APR in their return, I think, since when was the last time they ran a race? Was it
CTMP, I think.
I was going to say, it was CTMP back in the summer. So back on track with that car and with that program, and not a really a worse place no better place to start that program back up than fastest in that test. And then the 2 United Autosports Orcas, 2nd and 3rd place in P2. GTD Pro, it was the Ford Mustangs, which are pretty much just sweeping the top of the timesheets there. The 65 had the 3 fastest times from the drivers, and then the 64 taking up 4th and 5th with Mike Rockenfeller and Seb Prio in that car. And then in 3rd, it was the AO Racing Porsche. the championship defending AO Racing Porsche. And then finally over in GTD, bit more success for Porsche over there as well with the number 120 Wright Motorsports Elliott Skier driven Porsche 911 GT3R, followed up by second place, but not with one of their official drivers. It was Matteo Cressoni in the Iron Dames Porsche, rounding out the... Oh, sorry. No. I was going to say, is Cressoni racing for Iron Lynx? But yeah.
Yeah, I believe so.
And Magnus Racing with Andy Lally in the Aston Martin Vantage in third place in GTD. I want to get your thoughts on the Aston Martin Valkyrie. This is the first time we really got some more substantial press video of that car. Actually, Lanky Turtle made his way over to Daytona as well and sort of pulled the sneaky "I'm on a track tour, let me film a video while their car's going around track" type of deal. So we got to hear some more official audio of that car where it's in a proper testing environment, especially around Daytona where the sound is usually amplified off the grandstands quite a bit on the front stretch. I want to get your thoughts on the sound, particularly out of that car.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the first time hearing the audio from the car. There's been some pretty good high quality video that's come out from their previous testing efforts, but the car obviously sounds very unique compared to all of the other GTP cars out there on track. Just the uniqueness of all of the GTPs make them sound pretty unique as it is. But with the Aston Martin is going to be music to the ears. I think when finally get to hear it in person. Now, did the car have a muffler on it at Daytona?
This is why I asked. Okay. This is why I brought it up. Because we actually had a message in the chat from
I saw that. Yeah.
Saying, Aston Martin... no, sorry, this was a separate message. If someone were able to sneak into the Heart of Racing garage and saw off the mufflers, would anyone mind? Yes, they are definitely running that car quieter than it could. I actually heard it was one of the quieter GTP cars out on track, especially drowned out by like the Cadillacs. So... I don't know. We'll see. If you're going to put a Cosworth V12 in the car, just let it sing at full chat. I don't think anybody would complain about that. But that's the only reason I really asked. We already knew the car sounded great, but it was maybe a little disappointingly quiet, at least from the videos that we had seen. I don't know. I'm still waiting to hear it in person, which I guess I'll probably have to wait until Sebring to hear that now.
Yeah, I wonder... I'm trying to think, like... I don't recall seeing any reports from testing that, like, prior to this test, that it was obnoxiously loud compared to the other cars. I mean, it doesn't mean that it wasn't, but I'm just trying to think, some of the tracks that IMSA goes to and that IMSA has, previously visited as well, have had, a noise limit on what can be emitted from the track, and they measure the noise level. So I wonder if there could be something to do with that there were concerns over that, but I can't think of many tracks that would have this.
Well, Laguna Seca would probably be the main one.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Laguna Seca would be a big one. So I don't. Maybe that could have something to do with it as well. Cause it was at the WEC test, end of season test as well, was it? No, it wouldn't.
No, it was at Qatar, or sorry, not Qatar, Bahrain, but it wasn't running in that rookie test on the Sunday. No, so what I'll say about that is, I heard in person, luckily, the Lola Aston Martin, the B0960 back in 2011, and yes, that was a while ago. It was 13 years ago, almost 14 years ago at this point. What I can tell you from remembering it is that car was loud. And you mentioned obnoxiously loud. It was getting there. It was like 2017 Porsche RSR, Corvette C7R. I mean, other cars that were kind of obnoxiously loud, whether you love it or hate it. And so far, I haven't gotten that sort of vibe out of the Valkyrie. I'm not one of these people who's like, every single car needs to give you hearing damage. Because at the end of the day, I'm wearing these earplugs at the track anyways, listening to IMSA radio. So, you can say, who am I to care? But, if it's a V12, I just hope it doesn't get masked out by some of the other cars on track.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. I guess we'll just have to wait and see, I guess.
Yeah. Which I sort of brings us on to the next point, which is that they will not be running. This was something that we had rumored. It was kind of like one of those things that we expected was going to happen, but we're waiting for official confirmation on whether or not they would run the Rolex 24 in January. They will not be on the grid at that race with either. Not with either of their cars. They're running two cars in the WEC. With that solo car in IMSA, instead they'll be foregoing that and making their debut at Qatar for the WEC season opener next year and making their IMSA debut at Sebring. It's pretty much the exact same thing we saw out of Lamborghini this year.
Yeah.
The main reasoning for it being you have a car, it's locked into a homologation cycle once you commit to it. Yes, you can make some joker upgrades within that time period, but you want to make sure the car is as close to its maximum performance window as it can be before you lock it in and then can't touch it. So disappointed, yes, not really surprised. It would be great to see that car on track at Daytona for the 24. And I think it's also very important to get cars on track for a 24-hour debut.
Yeah.
Especially when you're hoping to have some success at Le Mans later in the year. Getting that initial 24-hour race under your belt, yes, it could be very disappointing for you. You can look back at Porsche with their debut of the 963. But
BMW.
look at BMW. But look at the dividends that disappointment has paid off for them at this point now, where they're over a year into those programs, actually pretty much 2 years done with those programs at this point, or actually 2 years done with those programs. And now they're very competitive. So I'm not saying this would be a complete disaster for them. This is not going to be Aston's never going to be competitive the entire season. I certainly think they will have their chances, but getting 24 hours under your belt from the get-go, I think, is a very useful thing for new cars on the grid.
Yeah, it's almost, I can't remember what the total number of hours of racing are over the course of the season, but this is like a third-ish of the season here locked up in one race. So, it's a lot of running time for the car, but it's disappointing to see. I thought that when I saw that the car was confirmed to be at this test, I thought that was a really good sign towards it potentially making its debut at the Rolex, especially considering, it's an optional test. You wouldn't think that they weren't going to bring a car. They definitely wouldn't have run this test if they, I feel like if they for sure weren't. Well, no, they probably knew at the time that they weren't going to be at the Rolex. So I don't know. I thought it was, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I thought it was good news, and then they got my hopes up and kicked me.
Yeah. Almost like they did with the actual program itself back in 2019, but
it's true. It's true.
At least this time they're not pulling the entire rug away from us. They're just, they're saying, give us another couple months, we'll be on track.
Thankfully.
Taurus in the chat said Aston Martin's missing the Rolex 24 because is a one-off because they're trying to get the most favorable BOP at the cutoff, right? No, not really the reasoning for that. I mean, all the BOP nowadays, whether you have a new car or not, is largely based off simulation data. So it's not like foregoing the Rolex 24 is going to give you any real advantage with BOP. If anything, it's just going to mean IMSA has less data for that car going into Sebring. So
yeah,
we'll be interested to see what that means for them. But
they'll have to be at the Roar, won't they? I'm pretty sure they will, because that's the BOP test now. So I feel like
put thought into that, but I guess.
I mean, was Lamborghini at the Roar last year? But this was a BOP test.
No, this was the BOP test last year. So Lamborghini was mandated to be.
They might have to be at the Roar. I mean, yeah.
Huh.
That
would be quite the disappointment, wouldn't it be? If the car was at the track and it couldn't run.
Unless
race.
unless if IMSA is gonna do, they in the past they used to do Sebring official test as well in the lead up to Sebring. I think they did that a couple of years ago. They stopped it a couple of years ago.
I mean, on their actual testing site, they don't have any other tests lined up. I mean, not that I saw in my very quick looking around earlier. I don't know if they have an additional closed test planned for the off season. Somebody has better knowledge on that. Please let us know.
Yeah, it's something to think about. Yeah, because they do have to do that BOP test at some point, I would think.
Yeah. Just seeing if there's anything else related to that IMSA test. Okay, so question more just IMSA related in general, but Greg Carpenter saying who's running the SC63 in IMSA? Is a split with Iron Lynx a total breakup, or are they still running the IMSA program? Just curious on everyone's thoughts. So here's all I'll say on this. I would expect, based on what I've heard dating back to Petit Le Mans, that program will not have the Iron Lynx name attached to it next year in IMSA. You realize that program is sort of a partnership between Iron Lynx and Prema right now. I know Prema, or I would expect Prema, is going to be continuing with the more logistics side of that program, so they're going to be continuing their role in that capacity. I have heard of another, say, IMSA team that has a lot of history in IMSA that had their name tied to that program for next year, but I'm not going to say that quite right now because of the fact that it's been a few weeks since I've heard that and don't know if that's accurate anymore. But I will say that there's some rumblings going on about teams that could help run that program next year, but I don't expect Iron Lynx will be in the fray for that for next season in either IMSA or the WEC.
My question is, are they still going to have the tent that they have to put up with a forklift and takes them forever to put up and tear down next year? That's the biggest question for me.
Is Aston Martin only running the IMSA endurance races? No, they're running the full season except for Daytona. So any other race that has the GTP cars, sorry, Stu, you're not getting them at CPTMP. They will be there.
Sad. I'll get Sebastian. Oh no, maybe not. Maybe not. Sebastian Bourdais may not be at CTMP because there's a WEC clash that week.
Yep, that's right. Are we getting okay? So let's just. This is a good tie-in to, I guess, sort of the WEC because it's a question that relates to it. No, you know what? I'm going to come back to this question because it relates to Lamborghini and IMSA and the WEC. I do want to come back to that one.
Okay.
But for now, I do want to switch gears. Let's talk about the 2025 WEC entry list, which was unveiled last week. There are 18 cars in both classes for next year. If you're very good at doing math, that is 36 cars total, which is 4 shy of the 40 that the capacity was up to for 2025. Some of the additions that we're seeing in the hypercar class, because we are down 1 car from the start of last year, with Asada Fraschini sort of leaving towards the latter end of 2024. We do have the addition of those 2 Aston Martin Heart of Racing cars in the hypercar class, they being cars number 007 and 009, sort of a heritage to Aston Martin's historic numbers that they ran back in the GT1 days. They ran back with the Lola Aston Martin. It's very nice to see those back in prototype suits. Jota, of course, making their switch over from the 2-car Porsche program with cars 12 and 38 to Cadillacs. Same numbers for next year, but it does mean we're down an additional car there as well because of the loss of Cadillac Chip Ganassi Racing. We do have that loss of the Iron Lynx Lamborghini program. Of course, that's something that we'll touch on in a minute here. We have no second Proton 963. That was sort of getting tossed around as a bit of a rumor. And I already mentioned we're down 1 car from the start of 2024 from 19 to 18 in the hypercar class. Over in LMGT3, we do have that addition, speaking of Iron Lynx, for Mercedes for the first time in WEC competition ever, and the first time at Le Mans since 1999. Very nice to see that brand returning to Le Mans, hopefully under better circumstances than last time, especially with Iron Lynx backing that effort. We also have the addition of the racing spirit of Le Mans, not Le Mans, the track, or the race rather. That is a region in France, actually, the southeast part of France, which actually, if you know Lake Geneva, is, I guess, historically known as Lac Le Mans. I hope I'm not pronouncing that right. I guarantee it. But
it
Swiss
can't be
French
any worse
region
than how
of the
I
world.
pronounce some things. So,
and that is actually the origin of that team's name. It is not actually associated with Le Mans, the race, or the circuit. They'll be replacing D-Station Racing with the Aston Martin Vantage GT3 Evo. And then the two Manthey Racing Porsches will both look different for 2025. I already mentioned that Iron Dames is switching over to that Porsche in IMSA, where they're also switching over in the WEC as well, where they've had a lot more success with that car, both in the past in the WEC. Well, not that car in the WEC. They were racing the RSR in GTE AM, but in the ELMS, having some more success with that Porsche than they did with the Lamborghini program last year. They'll be running car number 85, supported by Manthey Racing. And then car number 92, which in 2024 was the championship-winning Manthey Pure Racing car. They'll be switching their sponsorship over from Pure Racing to First Form, which, if it sounds familiar, that's because that is the sponsor that was on the Proton Mustang in the WEC last year. They've also run as a sponsor in IMSA as well. And with that, they're bringing Ryan Hardwick over to car number 92. Interesting thing with that is none of the championship defending drivers that were in that car from last year will be returning to that car in 2025. And the only driver from Manthey Racing last year who will be continuing in that role is Richard Lights, moving over from car number 91 to car 92 next year. So I already mentioned at the top here, we have 36 cars in total. That's down 40. I have a couple thoughts on this, but Stu, I want to get some of yours first. I mean, we're a little bit shy of what the expectation, I think, was even a few months ago. I'm curious to see what you think of all of that.
yeah, I mean, one of my first thoughts is not actually at some of the the new Aston Martin that's on, for instance, or the Cadillac switch. It's actually the that what it's called, the hypercar, like the World Cup, I think is what they call it for the privateer entries.
Yep.
That is going to be a pretty not so fascinating championship to watch next year, I think. You have a 2-horse race now between a single Proton entry and a single AF Corsa entry, which it's good for the for the factory side of things to see. We're gonna have more. I think we're gonna have more factory entries in the championship, and all of the cars, of course, or all of the entries on that side of it, featuring 2 cars, which is fantastic to see. But a little bit concerning seeing only the 2 entries on the privateer side of it. You still want to maintain, I think, a little bit of that privateer interest, and not seeing a second Proton on the grid, or not seeing a new privateer that's sort of entering the fold there is it makes you wonder that what could be the future of that if especially with all the conversations about grid space being at a premium. So that's one of the things just to monitor, I guess. But then, of course, on the LMGT3 side of things, just the incredible kind of turnover that we've seen. You mentioned it with the championship winning Porsche. Both of those entries who did really well last year. You look at some other entries on the grid, like Codis is bringing in Ben Barnacote, who has a tremendous amount of experience with the Lexus over stateside in IMSA. Iron Lynx, you mentioned, moving to Mercedes. So there's going to be a lot it's certainly not a stagnant off season or a stagnant. It's not a
No,
stagnant off season for the
not even
WEC either.
close.
There's so much shuffling around where we're seeing a lot of new drivers. We're seeing a lot of lineups that are staying largely the same, but we're seeing a ton of driver switch. I feel like especially in the LMGT3 class.
Yeah, well, so here's what I want to say about this is, again, it's sort of not a trick question, but I want to see where your thoughts are with the 36 cars. And the reason I asked that is because I gave a little think about this. And, you might expect me to come in here and say, wow, this is blasphemy. We were expecting to have 40 cars on the grid. We only have 36. We're down one from the start of last year. This is horrible. We're killing sports car racing right now. I'm not going to do that because I actually thought about it a little bit. And the main thing that we need in sports car racing right now, above anything else, is stability. And stability comes in a couple different forms. It comes in, number one, you don't want to lose the teams that you already have on the grid, but you also want to have space on the grid for new teams and manufacturers that are interested. Mm-hmm. Having 36 cars for next year, while yes, it may be a little bit disappointing on the surface, I'm looking already towards 2026, and you have to think we're going to have probably two Genesi on the grid in 2026. We've had other manufacturers going around the rumor mill recently with Hypercar. We've heard McLaren's name tossed around a little bit. We've heard Mercedes with Iron Lynx. Potentially that gets expanded into a Hypercar effort someday. Maybe, maybe not. But the main thing you need there is room on the grid for these teams and manufacturers. And if we had a 40-car grid next year, that's a real chore. Okay, that becomes a real challenge for them to accommodate at least two more cars on the grid for 2026. I think where we are right now, you already know we have two cars interested in showing up in 2026 that we don't have on the grid next year. I think, all things considered, this is actually a comfortable place for them to be sitting right now, because you have those two additional entries that you can accommodate for 26. You have a potential of an additional two more, and it just gives them a little bit more breathing room to be able to work with the manufacturers and teams that they have in the championship right now. We don't need to be in a position where we're threatening to kick out privateers. We don't need to worry about kicking LMGT3 teams off the grid. In that regard, I would say that they're actually, they're doing okay right now. And yes, of course, it is a little bit disappointing to lose a couple of those teams and manufacturers over the off season, but all things considered, I'd say it's a net neutral. I'll say, not really a gain, not really a loss.
Yeah, you make a good point about the consistency and having that really strong base with minimal turnover is really important, even if it means that maybe the grid isn't at its absolute max capacity that it could be right now. Having that eye towards the future is really, really important. One of the things that I was just thinking about is, when was the last time that we had a top class in the WEC that didn't have one of those sort of independent manufacturers, like your Glickenhaus, like your Isota, like your Rebellion was, Rebellion built their own car, right? So it's been a while, hasn't it?
It's been a very long time. In championship history, at least dating back to 2012, I don't think it's ever happened.
Yeah.
Because when we started the championship, we had Rebellion. They switched to LMP2 in 2017. We still had Baikalas, which became Van Wall in 2017. 18 is when you had the sort of influx of LMP1 privateers joining Rebellion, SMP Racing, Dragon Speed. 2020, we still had Rebellion on the grid. 21 is when you had Glickenhaus join. So yeah, I guess this would be the first time in championship history we haven't seen a sort of non-OEM, like, recognizable road car name in the top class.
it's disappointing to see. It has been fun to see, that's the underdog, so to speak, going
Yeah.
up against the big manufacturers. That's been a fun storyline, the past handful of seasons. But dang,
Yeah. Well, and I guess if we're going to segue into Lamborghini a bit, I thought from the start that that was one of the negatives of the two-car mandate. Is it makes it a lot tougher for those manufacturers. And I've also said from the start that these are manufacturers, these are small groups that are building a car to your rule set. So, because if you build a GT3 car, now I know there's other manufacturer requirements, like you have to build a certain number of road cars for that. So it's not really quite as welcoming for a boutique manufacturer. But if you built a GT3 car, hypothetically, you can go race that in any corner of the world and basically any continent except Antarctica. There's going to be some championship waiting for you, either with open arms or you can try to wiggle your way in there. With the hypercar / GTP class, there's 2 championships you can race in. You can race in IMSA, you can race in the WEC. And as it stands right now, in IMSA, if you are a boutique manufacturer, if you're not hitting their road car requirements, which I believe are how many cars do you need? 2,500 cars. You're not going to be on the grid, and basically that's a shutout for any boutique manufacturers because they're not really building 2,500 road cars.
Yep.
So it's really just leaving them with the WEC. I don't know. I've said this spiel plenty of times, but I think that was one of the negatives coming out of that mandate. Which I guess brings us on to Lamborghini now, which, of course, they announced that they won't be continuing next year. Now, there is, I'll just say this outright, a lot of uncertainty from me especially on what the whole backstory is with that. Lamborghini has said one thing. I've talked to actually numerous journalists at this point about this story to get some of their thoughts as well on this. The way it was sort of pointed to me is that Lamborghini at the end of the day had a choice to make. That choice seemingly between IMSA and the WEC. They could continue running in IMSA, whether it be with 1 car or 2, or they could run in the WEC. It seemed like they didn't really have the ability with their current budget and their current team to run in both championships the way they had initially planned on doing. Mm-hmm. So the choice that they ended up making was continuing over in IMSA. And it seems like that soured a relationship that they had with Lynx, who perhaps would have wanted to continue over on the WEC side of things. That's why now we've seen their switch over to Mercedes machinery there. I'm going to read, just sort of paraphrase the Lamborghini official press release that came out of this, just so that you can sort of take their own words and interpret that how you will. But they've said specifically the change in the FIA WEC sporting regulations, which now also mandates brands to field 2 cars in the hypercar class from 2025, also changes the terms on which Lamborghini entered the championship this year and is no longer aligned with the company's strategy. Yes, that is a departure from what Lamborghini and Lynx had said earlier in the year, where they had both said, we plan on being able to facilitate that second car. At the end of the day, this is what Lamborghini is saying right now. So whether you want to take what they're saying at face value or you want to say that that's just an excuse, I'm going to leave that up to you. But I do sort of personally see an influence on that 2-car mandate hurting Lamborghini's program here. I happen to think that if it wasn't in place for next year, if it wasn't enforced, we'd probably be seeing 1 car in IMSA, whether it's full-time or Michelin Endurance Cup races, and 1 car in the WEC. And reality of the situation is we're seeing no cars in the WEC and 1, maybe 2 cars over in IMSA for next year. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think you nailed it there. If we don't see a rules change, I mean it's hard to say, for sure what they would do. There is still something to be considered with, the price of running 2 separate these 2 programs, one stateside, one one that trots around the world. But I think you would probably have to think it would be kind of a status quo thing at least next year with the one car in the WEC, increase it, add a second car for Le Mans. You know, probably one car Michelin Endurance Cup and IMSA. Maybe they add a second one for the Rolex type deal, but it remains to be seen what their plans are. Right, like we were talking about it earlier. We don't even know the team that's going to be operating the car in IMSA next year, and we're 2 months out from the Rolex. So there's a lot of dominoes that still have to fall into place for that.
Yeah. So it's a story we'll be following throughout the off season. We have it's crazy to think about how, think a couple of years ago, I'd be like, man, we have 18 cars in the hypercar class. That's actually a little bit less than we were expecting. Like, can you imagine that? And go back to 2020, only 4 years ago, and say that we were going to be in a position where that's a little bit disappointing. I think personally that just shows where we are in sports car racing right now, that we're very fortunate to be in that situation. But alas, if there's still something like that, we can still take some disappointing things out where they exist. And, certainly the absence of Lamborghini from the WEC grid next year is disappointing, I think, to many people, including myself. Well, I'll switch gears to some more positive news, I guess. We got news yesterday. Was this the thing that came out yesterday?
I think, it was the 25th.
Yeah, on Robert Wickens and some of his race plans for 2025. We're actually going to be seeing him. We mentioned DXDT Racing earlier, not really competing, but showing up to the IMSA test at Daytona a few weeks ago. Robert Wickens will be competing with them in the GTD class in that Corvette in the IMSA Sprint Cup races for 2025. Now that's starting off at the, forget the official name of the race, but the race at Long Beach in April. So we won't be seeing him in that car for Daytona or Sebring. It's actually been noted that he hasn't done any seat time in that car yet. And I think they're still working to get that system fully operational in that car. But this is all in part to that new Bosch hand control system that was mentioned in the later stages of last year. I was actually fortunate to be able to meet with Robert at Road Atlanta, helping out with some video content there. We were discussing the hand control system in the Hyundai Elantra TCR car that he's running there. And
same system.
Same
if
system.
I'm not mistaken. Yep.
Yeah, same system. It is sort of an evolution or upgrade of the initial hand control system they had in that car. And actually, thanks to Andrew, who's a sometimes listener to this show, had a good chance to go to the Brian Herter Racing shop back this past May, and try that hand control system out for myself. And I'll say it blows my mind that somebody is able to get used to braking with a system like that. And I know it's been a struggle for Robert in the past, but there's really not a lot of travel with that system. And you definitely don't sort of get that instinctive feeling through your hands as you would through your foot with a brake pedal. So absolutely astounded at what Robert's been able to achieve. But seeing him in that car next year in a Corvette of all things, in the GTD class, I'm going to shoot in as a fan favorite car already.
Yeah, it's going to be a fan favorite. Of course, it's just 5 races, the 5 Sprint Cup races. One of those is going to be his home race, though, at CTMP. So you mentioned no GTPs, but we are going to get Robert Wickens in a Corvette in the Chevrolet Grand Prix at CTMP. Also, nice tie-in with Corvette and Ron Fellows, partially owning the track. So lots of Corvette fans at CTMP for sure, and there's going to be a ton of Robert Wickens support for that race. So that's going to be a lot of fun to see. But the question that was lingering is that Robert's proven what he can do in a TCR car at this point. They've gone out, they didn't they didn't win a race in their championship year, but he's won a championship. He's won races. He's just about he's proven that he is a very, very good race car driver, and still, and now he gets the opportunity. The opportunity came together for him to move up and show his skills now in a different car. I think he said, he referred to, like the top flight again of racing, in one of the top GT championships in the world. So this is a great opportunity for Robert. Hopefully he goes out and, makes the most of this next year. And, hopefully we see this, sort of snowball from here, transition into a full-time role for 2026. And I know that's a little ways down the road, but I think everybody would agree that that's where Robert probably deserves to fall again, is in a full-time ride. So going to be exciting to see him, like you said, take to the grid for the first time at Long Beach. I was thinking, what is the first GTD race of the season? And the GTD Pro cars won't be at Long Beach, but those GTD cars will. Right. It's kind of getting thrown into the fire, to be honest.
Well, yeah, that was sort of my thought is, a track he has experience with in an Indy car.
That's true.
but it has been quite a while since he's raced, I guess, at Long Beach. I think this is the next logical progression up the ladder for a driver like Robert Wickens. And I saw a lot of people when that announcement was teased of, started being like, oh, is this the Genesis GTP? Is he going to be racing in the Genesis in 2026? Yeah. And I think it's important to remain realistic about these things. Of course, he is recovering from a massive injury back in 2018. And the fact that he strapped himself back into a race car in the first place is, a testament to how strong he is as a driver and how determined he is. So we were able to see him in TCR competition the past few years. I think the step up from a TCR car to a GT3 car with ABS is very logical. We have to remain realistic that jump from a TCR car to a factory GTP program with a hand control system would be a monumental one, and one that's quite frankly a bit unrealistic. So I think this is a great place to see him on the grid for next year. Who knows what the future brings? Is this sort of the next step up the ladder to even bigger and better things for Robert? We'll have to wait and see. I wouldn't rule it out, but very excited to see what he's able to do on the grid next year. He surprised a lot of people already with that TCR program. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be able to do the same in the GTD class.
Yeah, and this is a nice transition as well. Feel of car wise and speed increase wise. Like I saw people speculating that, when he put out an initial teaser video about it, is he going to LMP2? It looks like an LMP2 car, yada yada. But LMP2 is a huge jump as well. Like, we can't forget that these LMP2 cars are just a shade slower than the top class cars right now. So, you look at, the jump from a TCR car to a GT3 car is still no joke. The GT3 car is going to be much heavier, have a lot more power, but more aerodynamics. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily accurate, actually, but at least drive. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no more front wheel drive. So yeah, this is a big jump, and this is going to be a challenging jump, but I think this is a correct next step for sure. A jump to a GTP car would be pretty unrealistic.
Yeah, so we can expect to see him on those sprint races for next season, as we already mentioned there. Sort of keeping in the vein of IMSA a little bit. One thing I want to go back to that I jumped over earlier because it wasn't quite as relevant. We got a piece of news in the past week about some changes to the IMSA GTD Pro /GTD and how they're handling those two classes, sort of, do we want to keep them sort of kind of combined, or do we want to separate them? Well, they are making the decision to treat them as two separate entities for 2025. They will be having separate qualifying sessions. They will be split on the grid after qualifying. So if you have a GTD car, throw it on, throw it on the fastest GT lap overall. They're still going to be starting behind all of the GTD Pro cars. And then also they're going to try to split up the classes on restarts as well. Again, I'm going to throw this over to you first. I sort of want to get your thoughts on this. I think it's, I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah. I think it's just a change that makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a change that makes sense to me. Yep. It's like, we look at GTP, we look at LMP2, they separate those classes for qualifying, they separate those classes for the restarts. They don't mix those cars together. Why are they only doing it for the GT classes? And it has certainly produced some fun things to watch in recent seasons. For sure, watching, a pro GTD Pro driver that had a bad qualifying effort, or maybe didn't get a good lap in, flying through the AM drivers in the GTD class off the start of the race. Like, okay, yeah, that is fun to watch, but I think ultimately this is going to lead to a better racing product on track. Hopefully this leads to not that there were a lot of incidents at the start of races last year in the GTD class, that one that really comes to mind, and perhaps the biggest one to start a race, was at Sebring. We saw a bunch of the GTDs and the GTD Pros get tangled up. I think there was a Ferrari that was spun around. Both of the McLarens, the FAF and the Inception, got together. You're seeing you're seeing incidents like that very well may have been avoided outright, had those classes been separated. So, if it's going to help things on that front, I think it's a good move. Having the Pro class and the AM class all bunched together and just battling themselves when a race gets going again, or when initially starts, is good. I think I'm all for it. The one thing I don't know if I like is the separate qualifying sessions. I guess, I don't know. I feel like qualifying can be a little bit dragged out sometimes.
Yeah.
Because you realistically, everybody comes out and does their laps kind of all at once, and then it's either really slow at the beginning of the qualifying session, or it kind of teeters off for the last 4 or 5 minutes of a session, and there's like 2 cars that are still doing, have a realistic shot at putting a good lap time in. So I don't know if I like the separate qualifying sessions, but race-wise, I like it.
Yeah, I mean, here's what it boils down to, man. For me, is I've always said we need to make sports car racing more simple to follow for casual fans. Because, you and I are nerds. We'll watch this and they can make it as confusing as they want, and we'll figure it out because we just care.
We'll drink the Kool-Aid.
Sure. But for the casual fan, for the person who's been a lifelong F1 fan and they've tuned into the 24 hours of Le Mans or the 24 hours of Daytona, and they want to check it out, and they're saying, well, why do we have 4 different classes here? These 2 cars are in different classes, but they're actually the same car. Why do the GTD cars starting ahead of the GTD Pro cars here? Because it just happened to qualify faster. I'm always looking for even very small things that make the sport easier to digest for more casual or especially newer fans. And I think this is a change that makes that easier.
Yep.
Separate the cars out. You have 4 different classes. Separate them on the grid. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're all staggered at the start. Keeping them separated on the restarts as well will make it also easier, even for more involved fans like you and I, to actually figure out what's going on
Yeah.
in each class, especially when you're looking at a race like Petit Le Mans where you have a championship battle and you see a line of GT cars coming at you and they're all the exact same cars. You just have to sort of figure out by looking at, well, I guess either A, knowing the team, or B, looking at the number boards, which class they're in. Yeah, I would say overall I welcome it. So I got 2 points here. I would say number one, yes, I do feel like qualifying's dragged out. F1 pulls it off somehow. I mean, even I would say F1 can just get away with doing one session for all I care. I mean, qualifying to me has never been a spectacle. It's it shouldn't be turned into a made-for-TV product, really. And, with the exception, I guess, of the Monaco Grand Prix and Indianapolis 500, I guess we get really exciting qualifying sessions there. But
Yeah.
apart from that, I've always said, and I said the same thing about the hyperpole format being added to the remainder of the WEC championship. If you want to keep it for Le Mans and add a little bit of sort of pizzazz to it, sure. But for the rest of the season, we're just dragging it out. We're burning the clock. So I'll agree with you on that. Also, we have made note many times before about how long IMSA full course yellows are with splitting the classes up. Now,
Yeah.
in theory, if done correctly and done at the same time as the other classes, this shouldn't really be a problem because they would just get in line the same time as all the other classes. So when they pit, the pits are open for, is it prototypes first and then GT cars? They don't separate it for all 4 classes, right?
No, they don't separate it for all 4 classes.
Okay.
So it'll be the GT, the prototypes will all pit and all the GT cars will box.
Okay. So that's, still logical that they continue doing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really my 2 cents about it. I think it'll make it a little bit simpler for the more casual fan, but even for us nerds, we can understand what's going on a little bit better when we have that late race restart, which is oh so inevitable in IMSA endurance races. Also, I guess it's reducing the chance that we have in the future, but not making it impossible by any means, that we have a GTD car beat out all of the GTD Pro cars, which has happened numerous times now. So
yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah, that may be in the past now for sure.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to a couple of questions we got a couple of questions before the show. All of them from Johnny Test over on Twitter. We'll go over a couple of those. Actually, one of them was great because it ties into what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
He said, I think off of the Esses video a couple months ago on how to handle safety car situations in IMSA is being ignored. Don't you think the GTD Pro / GTD situation just makes it more complex now? I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think we kind of just touched on this with, does it make the safety car, procedure a little bit more complex? Perhaps. Is it going to be something that we really notice? Probably not all that much. Yeah, I don't know if this is going to change a whole lot, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm optimistic that it won't, because I would certainly be disappointed if this was cause for those safety car periods being extended. And you'll hear me talk about that if that becomes an issue. But,
yeah, I mean, you're going to look at this like doing a class split. If in one of the sprint races, I mean, the cars aren't really going to get that spread out, or shouldn't get that spread out anyways. You're not going to see that much intermingling of GTD Pro and GTM classes, especially in sprint races. Maybe in the longer races, if there's a 3-hour, stint that we get in a race, like maybe we're going to see some more mixing up of the GTD Pros and the GTD AMs throughout the field, but I don't think it's going to take that much. IMSA full course yellows are already complex enough. It's going to be a marginal difference, I think.
And sort of piggybacking off that, saying one positive is that I do like the splitting qualifying sessions. So first, the drivers get more open space. Second is that an extra 15-minute session getting to watch GTD cars only without prototypes on track with them. Yeah, I think that is a good point.
Yeah.
There's sort of it's a double-edged sword. Actually, that's not what it's a double-sided coin is what I'm looking for. With having that split qualifying session. On the one hand, yes, it does take up more time. On the other hand, more exposure to the GTD class, I think, which, sometimes can be overshadowed by the GTD cars, which are primarily, for the majority of the time, out qualifying the fastest GTD cars in the field. So I guess if you're a sponsor, especially, or just a team, it's nice to get that a little extra bit of exposure. But also, I don't know how many times it's actually been an issue. I suppose that some of the tighter races on the calendar, I'm trying to think of really where it would be an issue getting some open track space, because you don't have both GT classes at Long Beach anyways.
CTMP could be, but it's like one race, right?
Yeah, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, I'll accept that argument that it is a net positive to have that split session.
Yeah. I guess this is good for fans at the track, I think, more than it is better for fans at home.
Sure.
Watching this, when you're at the track, the more on track action that you're getting, the better. Even if it is, 13 cars running around for an additional 15 minutes of qualifying, or it's a benefit for fans at the track. I see the argument on this.
Yeah. Last question. Are you guys exclusively sports car racing fans today like me? I lost interest in NASCAR, IndyCar, and F1 years ago. Only form of auto racing where my interest has increased as I've gotten older is sports car racing. Is that the case with you? I'll start this one out first. I would say largely no. I don't think sports car racing has detracted my interest from any other series. I will say I used to be a massive NASCAR fan. That's really what got me into auto racing back almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I was pretty much exclusively a NASCAR fan for a handful of years. I have my own reasons now for not liking NASCAR as much as I used to. But no, I'd say I still watch IndyCar. I still watch Formula One. I just watched, I was up until 3:00 in the morning watching the Vegas Grand Prix over the weekend. So, but that's just me. I would say some of the politics in other series make me appreciate sports car racing more right now.
Yes.
Where some of the decisions that are made over in Formula One, you're like, oh, why is this even an issue of contention? Back when, thank God they finally allowed Cadillac on the grid for 2026. But back in January when they were saying, no, we don't plan on allowing this, I was like, why would this even be an issue of concern? And, you can point at me and say I nitpick and complain about tiny things in sports car racing, but at the end of the day, I do that because I care about it. I'm not going to sit here and complain for 20 minutes about the NASCAR playoffs because I just don't care anymore. It's beyond the point of me even trying to argue it. So
we're not going to go a show without mentioning a playoff format.
I'll sneak it in if I can because it's it's funny at this point. But IMSA, don't do it. Do not get any ideas. No, I would say though, in general, it's been, it's sort of substitute or works alongside those other series for me. And I do consider myself a fan of a variety of motorsports series still.
Yeah. I'm largely sort of in the same boat as you are. It's I grew up, in the golden age of, well, some people call it the golden age of NASCAR, I suppose. Back when it was at its most popular, sure. is when I was watching it. The Dale Jr. number 8 car.
Just raced over the weekend, by the way.
I know. Although, if you could actually watch it, if a stream held up for you, then that was a big deal. But so that era is kind of what I grew up in as well. I've been sort of an on and off F1 fan over the years. And and then sort of have rekindled, some of the interest in F1 and also in NASCAR as well. In recent years, it's definitely not what not I'm not as big of a fan as I was way back in the day, but I can certainly enjoy some of the NASCAR races nowadays. And this the same goes for for F1 and IndyCar. I don't go out of my way to watch the F1 races like I would have sort of in the past. Waking up in the Eastern time zone like 6-7 a.m. for a lot of these races. I don't necessarily do that anymore, but I will if I'm around, I will certainly sit down and watch them. So, like you said, at the end of the day, it's sports car racing is top for me, but I do enjoy all forms of motorsports. Whether it's even like regional racing. There's some good regional racing that's kicking around as well. But sports car racing, top for sure.
Yeah. And I'll move things over to some of the live questions that we got in the chat. So if you do have anything you want us to,
I do have one more question that
Sure.
came in as well, and this is from Reflector0157 on I posted it over on the YouTube community tab, and they ask, what are the chances of Van Wall returning to the WEC in 2025 as a part-time entry? And
Zero.
I think, yeah, I think I think the actual percentage is in the negatives at this point. So yeah, that's not going to happen.
Well, okay. So I will actually give this question some thought, though. They were expressing interest in joining back in 2025. Actually, they were expressing interest in joining back in 2024 as well. They, I guess, switched the car over from the Gibson engine that it previously was running to the Pipo Motors engine that was in the Glickenhaus, supposedly supposed to help with a lot of the cooling issues they had in that car, which was, I guess, the primary reason why it was running at such low power and struggling as heavily as it was. Right now, I think that that two-car mandate hurts them as much as it does any of the other boutique manufacturers. So the chance of them being on the grid in 25 is zero because they're not on the grid right now.
Yeah.
And one-off entries are really out of the picture for the WEC nowadays. You're not going to see them do a one-off at Le Mans. You're not going to see them do a one-off at any other race in the championship. Now, can you completely outrule them for 2026 if they got a large sum of money for backing and maybe another team that wanted to get behind them? No. Okay, the car is still eligible for the championship. It would have to be rehomologated because it is a new engine now, and I imagine they would have made some additional Evo sort of upgrades to that car as well. But it's not impossible for them to end up on the grid in 2026. It's just unlikely because of the new mandates that we're seeing in the championship. It just isn't as friendly for them anymore. And as much as I would love to say that the series isn't actively trying to push them, I don't think the series is actively trying to push them out, but they are designing regulations that are less friendly for smaller manufacturers. So take that as you will. Hopefully it doesn't come back to bite them someday, but that's just the situation we're in right now.
Yep. Nailed it.
Okay, so now I'll move over to some questions in the chat. Again, if you want to ask us anything before the end of the show, just throw them in, and we will try to get to those. Chris Longoria asking, after Harry Tignella and Alex Riberas, who would be the other drivers in the 007, 009, and 23 Valkyrie programs? Yes, good point there, noting that Tignella and Riberas are the first two confirmed drivers, both racing in the World Endurance Championship and the 007 and 009 respectively. We've talked about this exact question before, actually. At which point we realized that we're no good at coming up with who we think is going to be on the grid. I will tell you, Darren Turner, Mario Fahnbacher, and Harry Tinknell were testing the car over the summer at when they were doing their testing in Donington. This was one of their first public outings with that car. Darren Turner, he's a veteran of sports car racing at this point in time. Might be a little bit too old for that program nowadays. Maybe just stay as a reserve driver or a testing driver. Who knows? Mario Farnbacher, certainly wouldn't rule him out entirely. You could look at a driver like Nicky Thiem as well, potentially. Long-lasting ties to Aston Martin racing for himself. My question mainly is, are we going to see them run a 3-driver per car outing in the WEC, or just 2, similar to what Porsche is doing next year? And I would have to guess that they're going to do 2. Mainly because we haven't seen a whole list of drivers who are potentially going to be racing in that program next year. And it just sort of makes sense. This was a program that was supposed to be a 1+1 initially, 1 in the WEC, 1 in IMSA. Now they're forced to do 2 in the WEC. They're still doing 1 car in IMSA. I would expect 2 cars across the board. So 2 in IMSA, 2 in the WEC, and 2 in IMSA and 2 in the WEC for both cars. And then for endurance races like the 24 Hours of Le Mans, you get those IMSA guys over to help run as a 3rd driver. That would be my expectation personally, but I don't know. Do you have any other drivers you want to throw at the dartboard?
I think you gotta pencil in Ross Gunn and Roman DeAngelis for IMSA with these 2 confirmed. Ross is, we've talked about it again in previous shows, but Ross has been with the Heart of Racing in their pro entries for a few years now, and Roman DeAngelis has been with the team for a long time, and like this is the natural next step for both of them, I think. So and they've done a lot of testing in the car. They were both present at the IMSA test. So I think you just got to lock them in. That brings us to 4 drivers at this point. So fill in the last
2 or 4,
realistically 2. I mean, you could have like Ross and Roman DeAngelis go and be racing in the WEC as well, because is there a conflict with GTP and Hypercar this year?
We had 2 conflicts weekend wise. We had CTMP, we had Spa with Laguna Seca.
Oh, that's the one.
I think those were the only 2. No, so I would say, because
so
you
that's
mentioned
probably
those.
not happening. They would be they'd be the 3rd drivers for maybe the longer events, like the 24 hours, and I mean maybe you could put them in for, is it Bahrain is 8?
Bahrain's 8, Qatar is like 10.
So you could see that. Yeah, those are races that you'd probably want the 3rd driver for.
So I guess if I'm throwing all the darts at the board right now, I would say, of course, you have Tinknell and Riberas confirmed in the WEC. I would add Nicky Thiem and Mario Farnbacher to those cars. And then on the IMSA side, Roman DeAngelis, Ross Gunn. I think that's what I would say personally is the drivers I would look for.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll see if I'm right on that. Probably not. if trends are to be followed. Do you think, what do you think BMW will do in 2025 in IMSA and the WEC? I definitely think they're going to be more of a contender. They were really sort of starting to hit a stride in IMSA at the end of the season. In the WEC, you can say the same. They got a podium at Fuji. They were really strong in the latter half of the championship. I would say they, along with Alpine, were the 2 most promising outfits of the sort of rookie manufacturers in the hypercar class. I will be surprised, actually, if we make it through another season without at least 1 win for Team WRT, but then also BMW Team RLL picking up a couple more wins in IMSA as well. It seems like the endurance rate, the longer endurance races have been the struggle for that car. But alas, I guess their 2 wins in IMSA are both endurance races, albeit 6-hour races. So
that's true.
We'll we'll see. But I definitely think they've been a slowly progressing manufacturer. They haven't been improving as quickly as, say, Porsche had.
Yeah.
But they're going into their third season here, second for the WEC. I think we're going to see even better results from them next year than what we saw this year.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, with sort of honing in on especially that IMSA program, like we know there was a lot of turnover with the BMW program from its first year to its second year. That kind of showed in some of the results, especially earlier on in the season, and then we saw them finish the year strong. But even even despite them having a slower start to the season, we saw glimpses earlier in the season. Like the cars were quick at Long Beach. The cars were quick at Detroit. Now the drivers couldn't keep the cars off the wall in those races, but they showed good pace, and I think BMW could be sneaky next year. I think that they could be sneaky, that we could see them take a significant leap forward and be in the running for, not just a single win over the course of the season, but they will be in the running for multiple wins. I think next year.
Does the confirmation of the Cadillac F1 program have any effect on Wayne Taylor Racing or the Cadillac GTP as a whole? I would say I don't think so. Cadillac knows how important that program is for their brand. It's a very popular car, fan favorite in both championships at this point in time. They have a lot of history in sports car racing, successful history in sports car racing, and I can't imagine a situation where they would sacrifice that all for Formula One. It's easy to look. I was going to say that, but it's easy to look at Audi and say, you could say the same thing about them. They had a lot of success in sports car racing and sacrificed all of it. I don't think this is the same situation. I think this is going to be similar to what we saw with Alpine, Ferrari, Aston Martin now, even though Aston's sort of, you can thank the Heart of Racing more for that program getting rebooted. But, we're seeing those manufacturers compete in both championships without any major issue. I'm certainly optimistic that we're going to see the same out of Cadillac.
Yeah, I think if there were potentially going to be issues about the continuation of the Cadillac program, I don't think we would have saw maybe some of the moves that we saw this off season. They are increasing their presence on the IMSA grid. There is a third car that is now being supported on the IMSA grid. There is now a second car that's being supported in the WEC. So there's an increase in the number of cars that we're going to see with Cadillac racing, or the number of Cadillac cars. I guess it's not Cadillac racing per se, but there's an increase in the number of Cadillacs that we're going to see next year. And they would have had, the F1 program hasn't come together overnight. They would have known that, this F1 program was getting confirmed to be added to the grid. At least by the time, these sports car programs were being put together. So I don't really see it being affecting it, I don't think.
Yeah. Did anybody see the new GT3 Lamborghini silhouette? Yes, yeah. That's the I had to remember the name myself. The Lamborghini Temerario, I think that's pronounced correctly, which will be replacing the Huracan and GT3 globally in 2026. I haven't really thought too much about this program yet, other than the fact that we will be not having a V10 in that car anymore, which is very unfortunate to me. Have a lot of fond memories with that V10 in both Audi R8 LMSs and that Lamborghini Huracan GT3 program. We'll be switching over to a turbo V8, similar to what we've seen in GTP with their SC63, which is a little bit disappointing to me, but being a Lamborghini, I have no doubts that that's going to be a fantastic looking car.
Yeah, and I guess not going to be on the WEC grid. Unless if Lamborghini returns next year, but
yeah, well, we'll see.
Well, I guess
I'll leave it open
they,
for now.
Yeah, I guess they could return, but it's probably unlikely.
Well, for next year certainly. For
Yes.
26, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Do you think the GTP field will ever get big enough to trim one of the other classes from the race? So IMSA being, are we going to kill LMP2 or it's a good question. I don't think so.
Yeah.
We have record levels of interest right now, but this is actually a question I would love to discuss with IMSA, which is you have this issue right now of having to turn away teams in GTD, GTD Pro, LMP2 from races like the Rolex, where you have like near 100 car interest levels for that race. How do you manage that? And how do you manage getting or accommodating the teams that want to run a full season actually on the grid? The loss of the LMP3 class last year was certainly logistical for that. I mean, that was the first pin that you were going to drop there. I guess I would say if there's another pro or another class that would get dropped, it would probably be LMP2.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's enough stability in the championship right now that they're able to work around that. And I'm curious exactly how they would, but I don't think it's going to come at the expense of an entire class quite yet.
Yeah, I think if we saw anything, it would be sort of a slow trickle down. Like limiting a further limitation of the LMP2 grid. Right
Yeah.
right now, I mean, we have more. I think we have the same number of full season LMP2 entries from this year as opposed to last year. I think we kind of swapped out the Shonkrich Motorsports, and you're adding in Pratt Miller to the mix. I think that's the biggest change that's there. So yeah, like you said, there's a lot of stability right now in LMP2, and I mean, honestly, I hope that. I mean, it'd be an excellent problem to have, but I kind of hope that they keep the four class structure that we have right now. It is a nice combination between pro and am, and we know how important having healthy having a healthy am class is for sports car racing. Because it is very much a roller coaster of ups and downs over the years of grid sizes and things like that. So this interest level may not stay where it is forever, and maintaining a healthy AM class or AM classes are going to be important. So how would they deal with it? I think probably a slow trickle down. Maybe cap the GTD numbers, cap the LMP2 numbers a little bit more, and have it be a slower trickle down.
Yeah, and they do have the addition of that GT3 class in the VP Challenge next year.
GT3X or something? Or
GTDX.
GTDX, yeah.
So, I wonder if you're in a situation where you have to start capping GTD teams, whether it's pro or just regular GTD. Maybe you say, okay, only one car per team. If you want to run an additional one, we have another championship. You can go run that second car in. Perhaps that's what they're trying to future-proof themselves for right now. I don't know, though. I just don't think it comes at the expense of losing a class entirely. I think what IMSA has right now is a structure that makes a lot of sense. And it didn't make a lot of sense last year, where you had sort of a professional prototype category in GTP, and then you had the Pro-Am category being LMP2, and then you had, I guess, kind of another Pro-Am category in LMP3, but then you had drivers like Colin Braun in LMP3. So, like, this isn't full AM. Like,
yeah.
So I'm glad that they made that forward step. It was very logical to do that. But I think right now what they have is something that is very logical. You have that pro category for both GT and prototype, and then you have a Pro-Am category beneath those for some of the smaller teams, silver and bronze drivers to take part in as well. Because you got to realize that it's often sort of easy to forget how different these cars are. And, you can be a professional GT driver, a career professional GT driver, but not really do anything in prototype racing.
Yeah.
And they still need to have a place on the grid. And this is something I've argued with the World Endurance Championship before is, I understand why they had to make that sacrifice, but boy, I wish we could still have a professional GT class in the WEC as well.
Yep.
It just makes sense to me. But of course, they weren't really in a position to do that. That IMSA is. So I would like IMSA to keep that current structure that they have right now. I think it makes a lot of sense for them.
Yep. As long as there's grid space for it, I don't think there's a reason to axe it, and then make slight adjustments along the way.
Sure.
Nothing too drastic.
Yep. I fear the peak will come sooner than later. I'm excited to see Genesis, Lamborghini back, and most likely McLaren. But I feel by then we're going to see another 2 to 3 manufacturers back away.
But that's one of the beautiful things about, the way that the current regulations in the current state is like right now, if you see we see Lamborghini step back, okay, sure. But right there in the wings is Aston Martin that's stepping in. If we see, 2 years from now when Genesis hits the board, I don't know, maybe like an Alpine or something is stepping back at that point. I don't know. You have Genesis that's jumping in. It's kind of like we've been talking about grid issues, but there's a cycle sort of, I guess, like cycle a conveyor belt system sort of that's being produced here, is that there is a staggering of these new programs that are coming forth, and that will help ease the pain of some of the manufacturers backing off for sure. If you would have told us, 2 years ago, we're like, oh wow, the peak of sports car racing is like right in front of us here. And now that we're in what 2 years ago we thought was kind of the peak of sports car racing, and we're now looking another 2-3 years down the line where that could be the peak. So it could come sooner than later. We're not going to know what the true peak is until we're past it. But I do feel confident with sort of, again, this conveyor belt of manufacturers that are showing interest in the sport and putting resources into building cars. I think that is definitely going to help reduce some of the peaks and valleys maybe that sports car racing has been susceptible to.
Right. And this was followed up by saying, I don't think we're going to get to the point where there's over a dozen brands in one season in the top class. You might be right about that. But as you sort of mentioned here, we almost need this sort of, I'm going to call it a circle of life where, much like humans, we're more being born, more are dying. And you almost need that right now with the issues that we have of not being able to accommodate this many manufacturers on the grid. I'm not saying that this is like a positive. Okay. Of course, I would love to have 16 manufacturers on the grid. I don't know how you'd even start to accommodate that, but if we could have 16 manufacturers in hypercar GTP, sure. Sign me up. I'll be there.
Yep.
But to what you mentioned, Stu, yes, there are definitely manufacturers who I am concerned about not being on the grid 2 to 3 years from now. I will outright say that. At the same time, we are hearing about manufacturers who are potentially joining the grid in 2 to 3 years. So I'm sort of looking at the balance and scales there. You have to weigh the benefits of both. The one thing I will say is I certainly don't want sports car racing and its organizers to become complacent with the success that we're having right now. And I think that's happened before, to be honest with you. And some of the decisions that are made reflect that. My fear is when manufacturers start leaving and then more are not coming in. because we've seen in the past how quickly categories just go away. Happened in LMP1. Now, granted, LMP1 was nowhere near the level of interest that we have here, but it also happened in GTE Pro. And look how strong GTE Pro was in 2019, and then how low it was 2 years later.
Yeah.
So, I certainly hope that that's something that's always in the back of their minds. Don't get complacent with this success right now, because it won't always be that way. I can say that outright, that we will have a situation where eventually this interest will drop. But for now, you may be right that we won't see over a dozen manufacturers in the top class, but I think it sort of works out in the championship's favor right now that it isn't the case.
Yeah.
As weird as it is to say. Any insight on, specifically addressed to you, any insight on what FAF is doing next year? Saw several postings that the McLaren was for sale.
Yeah, I mean, despite how sketchy that ad looked, apparently it's legit. It sounds like Marshall Pruitt confirmed it on somewhere on X, Twitter, whatever. That he can. I saw him confirm that the car was, I believe, for sale, but there was no announcement as to what, I don't remember. But did he confirm that it was for sale? He confirmed that FAF would be on the grid next year, but there was no confirmation on what the car was going to be. So
I don't want to misquote him, but I thought he said it would be with a different car.
Yeah, that was my knee-jerk reaction as well, is that, yeah, it was something along the lines of, it is for sale, but they will for sure be on the grid with something. Which I have no idea what FAF would go to. I can tell you it is very likely going to be one of the cars that FAF is a large dealership chain here in the greater Toronto area, and actually various dealerships across Canada. They are the biggest McLaren dealer. They're the only McLaren dealer in Canada. But they also have like BMW dealership here in Toronto, Porsche dealerships. There are a few, a few manufacturers that you could point to and say they could run one of those GT3 cars. I mean, if we wanted to get fun, then a return to Porsche would be interesting. They have posted a lot of content on their social medias recently about their old Porsche, the car that they won a couple of championships with. So could we see a return to them? Who knows? It's a possibility, I suppose, but anything's a possibility at this point.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
They could be selling the McLaren and just getting a new McLaren for next year. I mean, we
right, and that's where I don't have the post up in front of me, but I believe Marshall said they're running a different car. Now, does that mean a different McLaren chassis, or does that mean a different manufacturer? I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll find out, I guess, in due time on that.
I can tell you, if they do another open house to unveil the car again this year, I'll be there. Okay, I'll be there.
Getting the scoop.
Yep.
I think I have a business idea. Oh boy, here we go.
Uh-oh.
Start a car company that can make homologation compliance road cars with the same badging as these boutique race manufacturers. It'd be darn cheaper than having to design and build the road cars themselves. Yeah, it's a good idea. You got a lot of money for it.
Yeah.
I don't have the money to shell out to help Asada Fraschini make a bunch of road cars, specifically 2,500 for IMSA, but if somebody wants to chip in, I suppose we can start that up.
Yeah. I got an idea.
Sure, go ahead. This is going to be even worse.
Hey. We saw there was a post today that Audi just sold their last their GT3
R8 LMS. Yeah.
Yes, I knew there was LMS in there. They just sold their last one today. So you buy the plans for that, and you can just rebadge it now as as a road car again. They're not. Audi won't say no, right?
Sure. I got a great idea too. I mean, if you're Audi, you can take this idea. It's free. But if you have a successful customer racing program that is extremely renowned in sports car racing and TCR and GT3, getting victories around the world, that is profitable,
True.
you can keep running that program and it will keep making money. As crazy as that is to say, you don't have to cancel that customer racing program. You can keep running it. But, if you want to go run Saubers, you can do that too. Have they released the Daytona 24 entry list yet? Any chance the Valkyrie will be on display at the 24, maybe as a display? So the first part, no. That should be out some point probably soon.
I think we got the first look at the entry list like middle of December last year.
I can't remember when it was. But
yeah, I feel like it was like early to middle December last year. Maybe just after the test.
So it should be soon. Maybe by our next episode. Maybe, at this point,
crossed.
probably Thursday.
I was just expect that in 2 days.
And to the second part of your question, the Valkyrie being on display. So Stu mentioned earlier, will that car have to compete in the Roar for BOP testing? That I don't know. I'd be very interested to find out. If they do, keep it around as a show car. Yeah, you might as well draw some interest. Might as well fire it up.
Heck yeah.
Let some people hear it. Sebring's not that far from Daytona, so you can get a lot of people crossing over there. But I don't know. I guess, do they have like a show? I haven't seen a show car of the Valkyrie, so I guess it would be a live chassis if they did have it. And I guess at that point, the question is what are they doing with it at the time? Their base is in Phoenix. If they're doing testing around Florida at that time, sure, maybe, especially if they have to run in the Roar. But I suppose we'll see.
All the team members that are working on the cars, they're probably going to be, most of them are probably going to be at Daytona anyways.
Right.
So they're probably not going to be doing any testing at the same time. So it would make a lot of sense to have the car there.
Yep.
Now
the
they don't always do things that make sense, but
yeah.
There's
another question on Cadillac with the whether or not the F1 program would hurt the GTP/hypercar program. No, I again, just to quickly summarize, I don't think that would be the case. Yep. Do you think the Aston LMH was kind of a letdown? Okay, so this is going back to what we said earlier. What's the point of earning a V12 in 2024 if it's not for the show being the noise? I guess a little bit. It is disappointing to not let it run at full chat if they aren't able to do that for one reason or another. Again, I heard the Lola Aston Martin in person. I know how good an engine like that can sound in a prototype, and you can hear that the Valkyrie would probably be very, very loud. If nothing else, I hope it isn't really masked up by the other cars on the grid. Because we do have some loud cars in IMSA, not as many as we used to, but certainly some that would seemingly cover up the noise of that Aston. And if nothing else, I hope that that's not the case. I think
we had Andrew did drop in. We were talking about Andrew earlier, and
hey,
Andrew did stop by.
Yeah, we're talking about your hand control system, by the way, earlier that you helped Wickens with and Bosch. Cadillac program actually helps the F1 program. It's kind of a blow-off valve for costs in F1 due to the cost cap. Yeah, you could look at it that way. I think that was more the case for like Ferrari, who needed to do something with their personnel without just showing them the door. And a lot of those personnel just went over to assist with the prototype program. With Cadillac joining F1 after having a prototype program in place already, I wouldn't imagine that's really the case. But certainly the big thing with the manufacturer like that is just brand recognition. And Cadillac is doing a lot right now to reshape their image. I mean, they are not the grandpa car anymore. They are a manufacturer that is serious about trying to show that they're a performance brand, They're, they're
It's
a
the
story.
choice of rich soccer moms everywhere.
But they're really trying to shape their name as a performance brand right now,
Yeah.
and they're spending a lot of money to do it too. And I wouldn't be surprised, quite frankly, if we don't see them in NASCAR as well in the next few years, because they don't really have any more sedans that they're making as the Chevrolet brand anymore, with the Camaro going away. So,
Oh, that would annoy some NASCAR fans, I'm sure.
sure, but at the end of the day, what are you going to do?
It's about branding.
So, I think what Cadillac is doing here is they're capitalizing on doing an awful lot to reshape that brand. In Formula One, yes, it helps get that name out to a wider audience, but I think the prototype program is a better expression for Cadillac themselves as a brand. They get a lot more design flexibility with that prototype program than they will in Formula One. Certainly the fan favorite V8 that everybody loves is going to get a lot more recognition than people saying that Cadillac V6 in F1 sounds really good.
Well, you see the iconic lights on the GTP are what you see on the street. Like, you see those iconic bar lights now. Yeah.
Yeah. And you could say that across the board
Yeah.
in GTP with the LMDH cars. So, I've said it plenty of times now, but I think it's going to be a good substitute to that sports car racing program. Oh, and yes, we couldn't make it through the episode without getting here. I completely forgot I went famous on Twitter over the weekend.
Yep, viral.
What made you want to watch the Vegas Grand Prix on the CCTV cameras? It's actually a funny story. So I will end the episode with this, just because I forgot to bring it up. But yeah, so if you didn't see, I put a thing up on Twitter, X, whatever, on Friday night, Thursday night. Can't remember. No, it would have been Thursday night, I think. Just watching practice 1 or 2 from the traffic cameras that they had lining Las Vegas Boulevard. And it got like 88,000 likes, and like I had accounts with 7 million followers tweeting about or posting about it on Instagram. So that was my moment of fame. But and then I followed it up because I was like, oh, this is my new content strategy. So I posted a video of the first lap with that, and that did like another 20,000 plus likes. Interestingly enough, last year when the drain cover came flying out of the track, it was right in front of one of those security cameras. And so me and a bunch of other people last year were saying, oh, well, F1's not really showing the repairs over there because they're trying to hide that PR nightmare. Let's just go to the security cameras and see if they have anything. And sure enough, you could see the trucks going over and looking at it. And there was actually a great video replay of that incident happening in practice 1 last year from that security camera. So that was in the back of my mind all weekend. I said, I'm going to go look at that. I did not think it was going to be that successful, but sure, there you go. Maybe if we can, you know what, IMSA, if you're looking for ideas, you race at street circuits as well.
Yep.
And apparently the racing fans really love when you post video from traffic cameras of your race cars going around track. So Long Beach, Detroit, your ideas or my ideas are yours. Go ahead and take it, post it, and enjoy your engagement.
And then the feeds were down after that, I believe, were they not?
No, they were up.
They were.
There were a handful of cameras around the track, maybe like 8 to 10 of them. Most of them were down all weekend. So a lot of people who were going to the site didn't realize that there were a couple that were up. But no, there were 2 that were up throughout the entire weekend. And it's actually interesting if you go look at it now, because you can still go there.
Oh, to watch them taking down the track?
Well, kind of, but you can also see how different the track is a couple days later.
Oh, yeah.
And the other interesting thing about Vegas is they don't leave the streets shut down.
Yeah.
In between sessions, really. So
well, they roads, open it to traffic during the day, right?
Yeah, because it's the main road pretty much. So you could look at the roads 4 hours before qualifying, and there's cars driving down. And it really, apart from the branding on the walls being there, I mean, they do quite a bit of work in between sessions, and you can't really tell that it was a racetrack or it would be a racetrack a few hours from then. So interesting to check out. If you want to go see what that looks like now, you can compare it to the pictures that I put up, and you can see how much it's changed in just a couple of days now. But yeah, again, there's your idea for IMSA. I'll help you out with that one if you want for Long Beach and Detroit. Anyway, Stu, any closing thoughts for tonight?
No, it's hard to top this conversation about traffic cameras and watching racing. This is a unique one.
Yeah. Well, I got one. If you're in the United States, I would like to wish everybody a happy and safe Thanksgiving weekend. Thanksgiving being a couple days away at this point in time. Hope you get to enjoy some time with friends and family and stay safe in your travels. If you have some, best of luck to you. We'll be back at some point soon. We'd love to say 2 weeks from now, but we're not always 100% accurate with that. So we're continuing through the off season though. We'll get some stuff out and hopefully some exciting stuff in the coming weeks and months. I'd like to thank anybody who tuned into tonight's show, whether you're here live or on a podcasting platform. Hope to catch you soon for another episode of the Rain Race Podcast. Take care.